Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's great to see you. My name is Rabbi Elyssa Mendelson, and I'm the Rabbi of Port Jewish Center. And I'm thrilled to welcome Elyssa Friedland tonight as our visiting author. I want to just tell you a little bit about Elyssa. She is the author of Last Summer at the Golden Hotel, and also The Floating Feldmans, The Intermission, and Love and Miscommunication. Elyssa is a graduate of Yale University and Columbia Law School, and currently she teaches novel writing at Yale. She lives with her husband and 3 children in New York City, the best place on earth. We are so thrilled to welcome you, Elyssa. Welcome. Unfortunately, the first few minutes of Ms. Friedland's talk were not recorded. She discussed her journey to becoming an author, including her lifelong love of writing, the writing she did at Yale University, and her brief stint as a lawyer. The recording begins right after she talks about her decision to leave the law and pursue a writing career.
I've got my most successful novel to date, which came out in May last summer at the Golden Hotel, which I'm very eager to talk to you guys about. So the story of how this book came about really has to do with building off of my third novel, which was The Floating Feldmans. I don't know if anyone who's here tonight is familiar with it or read it, but that was a novel about a multi-generational Jewish family that takes a cruise together for the matriarch's 70th birthday. As a family, we went away to Israel on a tour bus and did a multi-generational trip for my parents, who are the same age, for their 70th birthdays. So I had a lot of material to work with. And I decided to set it on a cruise ship because cruise ships are funnier and there's a lot to write about. And the cruise ship itself was like a character in the book. And it was writing this book that I really fell in love with, writing about family and writing multiple point of view books where every chapter switches who you're hearing from. For me, that keeps the book fresh and interesting. And when you have a really wide range of characters who are across gender and age, it really broadens the chances that a reader will identify with someone. It's really nice. We all want to feel seen. It's just human nature. You want to feel seen. You want to feel heard. You want to feel not alone in your thoughts. When you have this really wide range of characters who are spanning all different, aspects of life and demographic, and you are more likely to find someone who thinks a lot like you and looks a lot like you. And also for me as a writer, it's super fun to jump into different people's heads. One chapter, I'm a 75-year-old man with cancer, as in the case in The Floating Feldmans, and then the next chapter, I'm a high school senior that's totally insecure and crushing on girls left and right. And that's so fun for me. It keeps it really interesting. So The Floating Feldmans was very well received. And I sat down with my editor and my publisher and we're like, now what? How do we build on The Floating Feldmans, stick to similar themes, but not tell the same story twice? I didn't want to go from The Floating Feldmans to the Steins on safari. Could I have written another Jewish family on a funny vacation? You bet. I've been on safari with my husband. If you just stick my parents there, it would amplify the humor by tenfold. If you put my in-laws there, it would just turn into a farce. Okay. I could write that book in my sleep, but I want to grow. Every time I write, I want to grow. And so for me, I was I definitely want to stick with the multi-generation. I want to stick with themes of family, but I want to do more. And so how do I do more? So a business. I decide to write about a family business because unlike in the Feldmans where they're all doing their own thing, here you have a business, and business, for better or for worse, especially a family business, can bring out the best and the worst in people. The best in that it fosters closeness. You all have something in common that ties you together, that keeps you closer than you would if you're your brother's a doctor on the West Coast and their sister is a teacher on the East Coast, and you see each other once a year for Rosh Hashanah. But when you own a business together, there's a commonality that ties you together. But as I think I'm not speaking out of turn when I say that when profits, when real money is at stake, the claws can come out, and a lot of jealousy and a lot of less wonderful feelings and closeness can emerge. So I said, I definitely want to write about a business. And I also want to write about friendship. Let's move beyond family. Let's have family, but I also want to explore friendship. So let's have this business owned by two families. And so the idea of having the Goldmans and the Weingolds co-owning this hotel, it was built organically like that. And as far as choosing the Catskills as a setting, since my books are really rich with Jewish culture, I mean, it was just almost like an obvious choice. And the Catskills are just like the most perfect setting for exploring intergenerational issues, because the Catskills of the 50s, 60s, and 70s is like incomprehensible to today's children. And I feel like I'm in the middle of it. Like, I went to Kutcher's in the Catskills in the 90s. So I caught the wave of the Catskills where it was still there and it was an entirely Jewish hotel and it was kosher. But like, the carpet was crap and the room was disgusting and like it was really on the decline. I mean, not that I noticed as a teenager, but like my parents noticed and they talked about it, especially because my mom had grown up in the Catskills heyday and she had spent every summer of her childhood from age 4 to 22 in a bungalow colony, like the entire summer. The traditional thing where she, her mom, and her sister packed up when school was over and they were there for 3 months solid. And her dad would drive up on the weekends, join for the weekends, and then, go home on Sunday night. So she had that traditional experience and she saw the Catskills like in its glory days and has like only the most positive things to say about her time there. So that's how the story was born. And then it was just figuring out who are the Goldmans and who are the Weingolds. And that's like the really fun. It's like you're just sitting there and you're like playing God. Maybe I shouldn't say that in front of a rabbi, but like, I don't know.
You can say that.
All right.
That sounded good to me.
I don't mean to be blasphemous, but in some ways, like, it is really kind of cool to just be like, okay, I am really like, for example, Amy, she's the character, she's the middle generation. She's the lone daughter of the Goldman side of the family. And I was like, I want to give her a complicated marriage, a difficult marriage. Well, it's fun for me because I can pick topics that are interesting to me in the real world. So I happen to have like been fascinated, I still am, by Purdue Pharmaceuticals and OxyContin and how that whole overprescribing and the role that the doctors played and the role that the pharmaceutical companies played. I'm like, you know what? I'm putting it in the book. And her husband is going to be one of these, they're called whales, who overprescribes narcotics. Then I think about Brian. He's one of the boys on the Weingold side in the middle generation. I'm like, you know what? I know a lot of people who like really peaked in high school and they peaked when they were young. And it's very hard when like adulthood doesn't treat you as well, like as high school did and college did, when you were like good looking and you came from this sort of fabulous family and everyone was like interested in you. And he like is the boy who can't grow up and has a hard time leaving the place where he was like, the star. I won't go into every single character, but I'm just giving you a sense of like how these people come to be in my head. I guess I'll conclude with saying like Louise Goldman, who's one of the elder generation, like she for me is like a Jenny Grosinger type. Jenny was synonymous with the Catskills, and she was the public face of Grossinger's. And I wanted someone who was very much also like Louise is the woman who's in a fabulous dress greeting everybody, and if some famous entertainer arrived to perform, like they were seated next to Louise at dinner and Louise brought the person around to greet all the tables, and she was like, playing chess with the seating assignments and things like that. So that's a sense of how I come up with some of the characters. And then the story unfolds. I don't outline. I just write as it comes to me. And that just works better for me. I'm also a writing professor, and I don't tell my students that that's like the way to do it. Like, I think that there are many ways to skin a cat. And I think that fabulous books get written by free writers like I do. And then amazing books get written by people who have meticulous outlines. And before they write their first word of chapter 1, they know exactly how the book's going to end. So this book, the plot hinges on whether these two families decide to sell the hotel or to keep the hotel. And I will tell you that I did not know what they were going to do until I wrote that scene in the boardroom and they took the vote. Like, that's when I figured out whether it was going to be a sell or a keep. So that's a bit about my process and a bit about me. I know Rabbi Mendelsohn had some questions for me. Obviously, I want to take your questions. There's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. Wow. I was wondering, like, when did you decide? And I won't say what they decided to do, but what the vote would be. So one of my questions is just, and I think, from speaking to a few people who read the book, who grew up in the era of, going to the Catskills, you do such a good job of describing, what the Catskills were like in their heyday. What was your research like? I read in I think of the end notes that you spoke to one of the Grossingers.
Mhm.
How did you do your research? What were the conversations that you had like? Could you tell us a little bit about that piece of it?
I mean, I definitely did plenty of research and I read nonfiction books and I spoke to a lot of people who had vacationed in the Catskills and also worked in the Catskills, but like I can't really shortchange Dirty Dancing. And honestly, that movie was the visual that I needed all along. I had been, like I said, I'd been to the Catskills as a teenager. I revisited the area as an adult when I was researching for the book. But the Borscht Belt hotels and bungalow colonies are gone. So when I went up to the region, it was more about capturing the trees, the types of roads, the feel, especially of like the Catskills of today, since the book is set in 2019. I wanted to capture like the more hipster Catskills that exists now. But really also like I just want to smell the air. Like I went on a cruise. I'd never been on a cruise, and I went on a cruise before I wrote The Floating Feldmans because it was like incomprehensible to me to write that book without ever having been on a cruise. And I felt the same way. Like I had to revisit the Catskills before I wrote the book, and that was really just about like kind of just feeling the atmosphere. And some of it like really got absorbed into my bones and then made its way back into the book. I was very lucky to meet Bunny Grossinger. She is Jenny's daughter-in-law. She married Jenny's son, and she raised her children at Grossinger's. So that was like the most amazing resource because not only did she have like countless memories from the Catskills, but she had the experience that would be the most akin to the Weingolds and the Goldmans, which is like being an owner and having children run around the hotel as the owner's children. And she was amazing. She's still alive. She's in her late 90s. And when I interviewed her a bunch of times, she just told me story after story. And my mom, like I said, she's a resource. In fact, when she read the book the first time, the bones of the story were the same and the plot arc was the same when I finished my first draft, but she gave it back to me and she was like, I really like the story, but like you have to layer some raunchiness in there because like everyone was getting in trouble up in the Catskills and like there's not enough, you know, you don't have enough shenanigans happening. And I was like, Mom, like that's so uncomfortable. And she was like, well, it's true. Like there was a lot of like hanky panky, I think was her word that was going on. And I was like, okay, like a message received. I will go back and layer that in, which was fun to put in. I talked to people who worked as waiters. And I mean, the thing that was like the biggest takeaway from my research was how much everyone loved it. Like, I can't think of a place that I've ever heard, including like the nicest 5-star resorts that are around today, where everyone who's been, and I asked them, they're like, oh, it's amazing. Like I had the best time. It was incredible. Well, that's how everyone talks about the Catskills in a way that like I've never, like people are going to the Four Seasons in Hawaii and coming back with like a list of complaints, you know? Meanwhile, maybe it's like the haze of nostalgia, but people are like, it was the best place ever. And sometimes I'm like, well, what did you love about it? And the answer was always some form of like, what's not to love? It was just nonstop fun, which was, I think is very well depicted also in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel in season 2 in the episodes that were filmed there. And, I did reading. I went to lectures on the Catskills. Luckily, I was researching before COVID, so I was able to go up and stay in the region and stay in a hotel up there. Nothing like the hotels I'm writing about, but at least, got to be up in the area. And I didn't have to do these interviews over Zoom. I was in person with many, many people who spent time in the Catskills, and like all together, like a picture just formed in my mind. And that's what I put on the page.
So I removed the spotlight for a second, and I'm hoping the whole screen is now on the page. But I'm just wondering, if you can put yourself into gallery view, by the way, friends, just do that if you want to try, if you can figure out how to do that. We've been on Zoom for 18 months, so I'm kind of putting it in your hands. So I'm wondering for those of you, like who, are listening to Elyssa tell her, talk about the Catskills. How many of you have memories of going to the Catskills and it's resonating with you in terms of the description of what the Catskills were like? So I just thought maybe, is there anyone who wants to share? I will, you have you can't go on very long though, but like a good Catskill story. Can we get one from somebody in this crowd? Somebody has to. Joyce, okay, but you have like 1 minute for the story.
Okay, it's not typical because I'm coming from a different background, but we had both of our boys' bar mitzvahs at Kutcher's. When we had our honeymoon, we were at the Concord. But the thing I wanted to point out at Kutcher's was Mrs. Kutcher was amazing. And I was watching her deal with every single customer that came by her desk as though they were important to her. And I said to her, I said, how can you be so close to everybody? She said, because I treat every occasion as though it was the first one and only one, whether it's a wedding, a bar mitzvah, a this or a that. And I was really impressed by it. And then it turns out that her daughter-in-law went to Great Neck High a year ahead of me. So I knew Carla. And it just became a family, even though I never really had gone to the Catskills before I got married. And I found it to be very warm, very giving, very much fun. The waiters, everybody's happy, serving whatever, the comedy that came out of certain situations in the Concord when we were married. We were the furthest table away from the kitchen. And my husband, if anybody knows him, is amazing. So he asked for Captain Crunch. Who thought of Captain Crunch? And after a while, he'd ask for all these unusual things. And the waiter, bless his soul, the next morning got Joel's number and came with a cart of everything you could imagine. So if Joel asked for it, it was on the cart. And I was hysterical. I said, man, is he good? So my little bit of, of that relationship was really cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Does anyone else have a quick Catskill story? Okay, Mom, I'll call on you. You're muted, Mom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, number one, I got engaged in the Catskills at the Concord Hotel. That's number one. Number two, friends of ours used to go every week, and he was a psychologist, the Quitman's a psychologist, and he would give a lecture every week at Kutcher's. And because he gave the lecture, he got free golf. So that was number two. Number three, Daddy and I would go to the Nevele every July 4th. And we would go with friends and we'd play tennis, take tennis lessons and go horseback riding. I don't think we even played golf then.
I did.
Oh, he did. I did not. But we spent a lot of time. And also, you spent time Thanksgiving.
Mom, I'm not asking you. I'm asking if you're going to tell the story, you have to tell the story.
Well,
you can't just tell me what I know.
We have a lot of Catskills in our history. And I do miss it.
Thanks, Mom. Elyssa, I just wanted to act out one of the scenes in your book. So I'm okay. So, all right. I'm going to let people, think if you have any other good Catskill stories, but I wanted to read this, this quote from your book. And, as you said, the heart of your book is really about these two families, the business they built in the Catskills is the Golden Hotel, and the decision that they have to make about whether or not to sell it. And the reason that they're in the position of having to sell it is, as you've described, the Catskills is no longer what it once was. And so, so you write early in the book this about why the Golden Age was ending. You wrote, so much of the decline of the Golden had been out of Brian's control. And Brian is the person, for those of you who haven't read, who is managing the hotel for both families and is one of the sons, and had started long before he took over. It was the 3 A's that had sunk the Catskills, reporters and historians said. First came air conditioning. With AC available in the city, urban dwellers didn't feel the need to flee to the mountains in the summer. Then came air travel, which was constantly getting cheaper. Just last night, Brian had gotten a pop-up ad on his phone advertising a $69 flight to Iceland, a stunning Nordic blonde beckoning him to the Blue Lagoon. That was certainly a more exotic way to cool off in the summer than a visit to the Catskills. Finally, there was assimilation. Jews were no longer forced to barricade themselves into the hotels that welcomed them. So I have actually found that to be like pretty profound in terms of thinking about how life has changed, you know, not just for the Catskills, but also for all of us. And also in particular, how Jewish life has changed, you know, how a modern, you know, a modern world and an increased, you know, mobility, our increased ability to move, to travel has also changed the way, you know, the Jewish community gathers. And so, you know, I was just wondering, you know, it's like how you're like, how you wove in your, like, what were you thinking even in terms of, you know, Jewish identity? Did that just come out of you? Were you, you know, do you have like opinions about it that you know, that you don't even realize that just kind of got channeled into the story? Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not sure if I'm asking this question well, but.
Well, I certainly didn't coin, you know, the 3 A's thinking the
Right.
Catskills. That's like a very well established
Yes.
thing. But, you know, of course, as a novelist, I try to bring, you know, I breathe
Color.
life into it with like some extra sensory detail so that it's not just hearing like a lecturer rattling off like air conditioning assimilation. But I, you know, I try to like bring it to life with evocative language and with examples. You know, I think it depends what world you travel in. I think that there are enclaves. Like I happen to be friends with some Jews who are Syrian Jews, and they are very much barricaded still. Like I don't know if anyone knows members of the Syrian Jewish community at all, because I don't really know if they're like located in on Long Island. Like
There's actually a very large Persian community here.
that I knew in Great Neck.
But yeah.
I think they're similar. I think that
Yeah.
listen, I don't want to speak in generalizations. I realize that that's like a fool's errand, but you know, so take it with a grain of salt. But from what I understand, like from my Syrian friends, like they really are traveling in packs, and when it's Passover, like they are on, you know, 500 Syrians, like from many families, are all traveling together, you know, for a Passover program in Florida or in Mexico, and they are moving, they are living, spending their summers in Deal, New Jersey, on the Jersey Shore, kind of mimicking the Catskills in terms of like the staying together. I don't know as many Persian Jews, but I'm under, I believe it's somewhat similar in that way, you know? As far as like assimilation writ large, like everything is very relative. Like I started out my talk, you know, I thought I was like a fairly assimilated Jew because I wasn't as religious as my cousins who were like in Borough Park, you know, and didn't like, they wore skirts, you know, and I'm in ripped jeans. And then I get to Yale and I'm a Rebbitzin practically because I can speak Hebrew and I've been to Israel, and the Jewish kids I met at Yale were like, huh? Like they, you know, there was not a big part of their identity. Like it's a huge range. I mean, I think it's really not so much. Yes, of course, assimilation is a factor. These hotels, it should not be, I actually want to tell a story. Like it should, because I think it's important. It should not be forgotten, like in terms of assimilation. These hotels, like Jews weren't welcome at other hotels. So it wasn't even like so much about trying to be together because that's like the belief that you should be clannish, but also like getting to other hotels and finding signs that said Gentiles only, and you couldn't go stay there. So I actually wanted to share, like, I didn't expect this to come up, but so this is the book cover for those who have not, if you bought it on Kindle or you haven't read it yet. I just want to hold it up so people can see. So everybody's white on the cover. If you can see, everyone has pale white skin. And there was pushback when I love the cover. I was very happy. This artist has done all of my covers. He works at the publisher. It's like not someone that I hire. The publisher does that. And I've been very happy. And then when it went to marketing, I got a phone call or an email from my editor being like, there's a concern that everybody on your cover is white. And that's going to turn people off. It's not a racially diverse cast. And I was like, okay, but the Catskills were the Catskills because Jews weren't allowed into other hotels. And so, like, I'm not really keen on like darker skinned people on the cover of my book as lip service when it's like, you know, not historically accurate, you know, and that it's not like I'm so thrilled. Like, my next book has a far more diverse cast, which I'm thrilled about, but it's also historically accurate. It works for them. Like, that doesn't work for a book that, you know, these hotels were like so popular and rose to popularity because of anti-Semitism. So I felt like it was like the tail wagging the dog, I guess is the best way to put it. You know, and of course when like it wasn't coming from like a malicious place by any means. The publisher was just like trying to be sensitive and like they want readers to feel seen and heard and not just like there's been a reckoning in the publishing industry that it's like very, you know, white dominated, and that's not wrong, but you also have to be historically accurate when you're writing a book like this. And then the minute I sort of, you know, took a beat and explained that, they were like, oh, you're 100% right. But not everyone knows that that's the history of the Catskills, and that's fine. And I have really enjoyed, as much as I love speaking to a Jewish audience, of course I do, but it's also really fun to speak to non-Jewish audiences who are like, huh, Dirty Dancing was supposed to be a Jewish hotel? Like, they had no idea that Kellerman's is like a emblem of the Borscht Belt. And there, in fact, just today I had a review from someone who specifically wrote in her review, like, I'm not Jewish. I had absolutely no idea about any of this culture. I love learning about it. And in fact, I'm like especially happy to have learned about it because like I had no idea that Jews weren't welcome at hotels. And this was news to me. And I just feel like appreciative that I've been educated on that. And I'm happy that that like stain on America's history is, we don't need to get into whether it's officially over because we know we've had a rough spring as Jewish people. But yeah, I just, you know, do I have like overall views on assimilation in general? No, I really don't. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, other than to say that the Catskills aren't coming back. I mean, they are revitalized now, but in a completely different way. It's not like a Jewish enclave anymore. It's like, if anything, it's like there's lots of people, Jewish people that go there, but it's not associated with any particular ethnic or religious group. It's like more associated with like cool people from Brooklyn who like have tattoos and like have cool looking strollers and their children dress really well. Like, that's pretty much like what I saw when I went up there. Like, hip, cool, good looking young people have taken over the Catskills, and they look great.
Okay, so I want to go in that direction with you. And I just want to say very quickly that, you know, when I read that passage in particular, I thought, you know, and of course, every rabbi is thinking, you know, I think the month of Elul just began and we have, you know, 28 days until Rosh Hashanah begins. And so we're thinking about our high holiday sermons. And, you know, if you're writing a sermon about identity, I actually think you captured it so well in terms of where we've been and where are we going. And I felt that way in terms of, you know, the Jewish community, well, maybe more like the Ashkenormative Jewish community, but used to kind of gather in one particular way. And the further along, you know, the further away we get from, you know, this gigantic group of people who immigrated to this country, you know, to kind of live the American dream, the more we you know, successfully achieve our dreams in America, the harder it is to kind of hold on to some of our Jewish identity at the same time. And I actually think that you, in my opinion, when I was reading it with those eyes, I felt like this story captured that. So whether you meant to or not, like that's what it made me think about and feel.
Well, one of the interesting things, a lot of the feedback I got, a ton of people reached out to me or publicly reviewed and said that they really liked the Jewish representation in the book, which I have to say, I am so glad that I didn't set about trying to represent Jews in the book. Like, that happened incidentally, but that's like very terrifying to be like, I'm going to represent an entire, you know, group of people. Like, and because that's like, first of all, you just worry so much about falling into stereotype or things being misinterpreted. So I didn't. I just wrote the story I wanted to tell based on my family and the 50 other families I know well enough to pull bits and pieces of, and my history at the Catskills and the history I learned. And I wrote the story and then never expected, like, probably over 1,000 comments that use the phrase like the Jewish representation in the book. I mean, that's definitely a buzzy word now to say like the way, representation. And I'm like, thank God I didn't intentionally try to do that, because I think I would have second guessed every line. I do think though, because I follow so many Jewish publications on Instagram, that like there's like a cool, it's still cool to be Jewish. Like Kveller, I don't know if you like, Kveller is like kind of hip and cool, and it definitely has like a millennial edge to it. And Hey Alma has a millennial edge to it. So there is like, being Jewish is cool.
Well, I think, I think actually, and I don't want to give away the end of the book, but I think, actually, I'm not saying being Jewish isn't cool. I think being Jewish is being reinvented, kind of for those people who have assimilated. And I don't think, by the way, assimilating means entirely letting go of your Jewish identity. It just means looking different than what we once looked like, in a different era.
But
So
like that must be true of like Catholics as well to some extent. I mean, like I don't know as much. So like I really know almost nothing, and I'm just thinking this now, but like I'm sure like, I think about like my physical therapist who's like from this very traditional Greek family, and I'm sure they look at her and they're like, you're totally like out in the world and you're mixing with like our, like when I went to her engagement party, it was my big fat Greek wedding, but like that's not the woman that like I see coming to do my physical therapy. Like she's much less Greek, I guess is the best way to put it, like when I met her, I didn't think like, here's a Greek woman. When I went to the engagement party, I was like, I'm at my big fat Greek wedding, So like, I think like all generations, there's an attenuation.
it's an interesting, I mean, anyway, I thought you brought it out, like the issues out really beautifully. And it was a lot, at least for me, it was a lot of food for thought. I'm going to ask one more question, then I know other people have questions, so I don't want to hog up all your time, but I just wanted to, you have this, what I thought was, really interesting in terms of, I thought you did a really good job kind of showing the way that different generations kind of see each other and don't see each other, understand each other and misunderstand each other. And you, towards about 3/4 of the way through, one of the grandchildren talks about, she says, I have an idea. Because of climate change and temperatures being higher, we could extend our season, our high season, all the way through Indigenous Peoples Day. And then it says, and then his grandma's hot tea sprayed from her mouth like a garden hose. Everyone else just looked confused. It's what they call Columbus Day now, Zach said. Another one of the grandchildren said quietly, because of the whole killing the natives and ransacking their villages thing. Amos, the grandfather, said, well, they're renaming holidays. Might I suggest changing World War II to the time 6 million Jews got slaughtered? Which is not funny, but made me laugh because, it was such a good, I just thought you did such a good job of writing, how the different generations like walk through the world and see it. And so first of all, like, thank you for being able to do that so well. But how did that work into the way that you wrote this story?
I mean, I think a lot of things just come from my own life. So I have my children who are 13, 11, and 8 coming home, and they're like, Indigenous Peoples Day, like we have to like bring in something. But I'm like, what? Like, what is that? Like, I'm not that old, and I had no idea what they were talking about. But based on the time of year, like I pieced together that it's Columbus Day, but like they're learning it as Indigenous Peoples Day, which is awesome, and I'm happy. But for me, I'm learning. I'm like, oh, like we don't say that anymore. Listen, like I get copy edits back that I didn't know. Like I'm not as sensitive as I could be, because this is not what I do. I'm not a sensitivity reader I'm a creative writer. I'm not a sensitivity reader. And there's like, you don't say master bedroom anymore. You don't use the word master, you don't say master bathroom. You'd say like the main bathroom, but I think that that's very interesting. Like there's all sorts of changes in the way we use language, and I'm learning, and thank God for sensitivity readers, because like to inadvertently offend people over like a phrase. Like, do I care if it's called the master bathroom? No, you know, but like, that's just how I grew up, like knowing that that's what that room was called. So, you know, it came from like having my children come home and talking about Indigenous Peoples Day, and my husband and I looking at each other and being like, wow, like you learn something new every day. And then I decided to write that into the book because it's like a perfect example. And like they feel so like woke and they understand, you know, like they're looking at the grandparents like, you don't get it. But like, of course we wouldn't call it Columbus Day anymore, you know? And then Amos is like, well, you know, like I know a thing or two about some holidays. And like, I don't really like thinking, like in my head, I'm hearing Amos being like, I don't really like thinking of like the time, you know, that like half my family was killed as World War II. Like, that's like maybe a little bit of a generous title to like give a war where really it was like just a mass genocide, you know? And so it's like one generation schooling the other. And yeah, and I think so. And I think that that really also is like very interesting, specifically with Judaism, because like if you think about on social media, like I don't know how many people on the Zoom are on Instagram, but like there's all the like black out your screens for Black Lives Matter, and like, you know, you change this is, I don't know if anyone, if like I'm speaking like, you know, Mandarin, but like basically like for to show that you support Black Lives Matter, you made your like entire screen black. And there were like various iterations of that for other things. And then when it came to like, there was a movement to make your screen blue when there was like a lot of anti-Semitic attacks in the spring. And like that one didn't like take off in the same way. And like I'm not on the Zoom, I'm not getting into it other than to say that like there's also something, you know, that the wokeness isn't always like even handed, I could say.
Well, I thought you did a really, you know, I thought it was really interesting just in terms of, you know, we have so much to learn from our kids, but our kids also have something to learn from us.
Exactly.
And I really appreciated that. And I, you know, as the mom of, you know, two teenagers who also are, you know, would never call Columbus Day anything other than Indigenous Peoples Day, which I think is a good thing. I want them to understand that, you know, that still change happens. It can't always happen as fast as we want it to, because you have to bring people along with you. You have to, you know, if people have been living with Columbus Day for 70 years or 80 years, you know, to just tell them, okay, you know, it's now called something different. Well, yes, I can embrace the reasons why, and I think it's really good, but you still have to give people time and space to kind of absorb the reasons for the change.
This certainly happens with my students, my writing students, because they're like, you know, they have that fire in their belly that like college kids have, but they also only have like 20 years of experience under their belt. So while they're brilliant and they have great, you know, they're directed by like, you know, a very strong and well thought out moral compass, like they don't have life experience like I do.
Yeah. You captured that tension so well. And, you know, and I want to say that, and I want to open it to other, you know, other people, but I, you know, and I also think that you did a really great job in showing just how much we can learn from our young people. You know,
Yeah,
there's such, you know, and how we really, you know, we don't give them sometimes as much credit as they deserve. And I just thought you did that so beautifully. I want to open it up for questions. I think I've certainly done enough my share of asking. If you have a question, if you want to either raise your hand and I can call on you, or if you have a comment or if you have a memory, I'm happy to call on you to share that. You know, Mina, where are you? Do you want to talk just a little bit about your, can I call on you first, actually? No, you're muted, Mina. Come on. Mina, you're muted. You unmuted and then muted again. You could do it. There you go.
Okay. I really appreciated the way you, because I'm on the oldest generation, like the ones in the old, that you treated them with respect. And because, of course, the younger generation doesn't understand what the older generation went through. I mean, we can tell you, you know, about different things. 1940, I was growing up, and the hotel in Florida said no dogs and no Jews. and you're 10 years old and you ask questions like that. Thank God that doesn't exist now, which is why the younger generation can have the freedom to question and to do with what they want. And I really appreciated the way you did your characters there and the personality. And I thought you made them each justified and I thought you characterized them very well.
Thank
I
you.
want to thank you for treating us older generations so nicely.
I
There was a lot of anti-Semitic, which luckily now you don't see, that I saw in the 1940s.
really appreciate the comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Minna. Sylvia Diamond, did you have your hand raised?
Yes,
Okay.
I remember when I was about 5 years old, my parents rented a bungalow. We called it a kohaline. And my father would come up to the Catskills every weekend. And we did that till I was about 9. And somewhere along the way, I befriended a goat on the farm where I was. And it was near the hotels that you're talking about. So we did go there for a Saturday or entertainment. But in the bungalow, it was on a farm. And I played with a goat. And as it grew bigger, it was getting stronger. By the end of the summer, it could practically knock me down. But I also went to the Catskills as an adult about 30 years later with my children, and I worked at a children's camp. And it was very different from the hotel scene.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Sylvia. Lisa, could you talk a little bit about your experience going up to the Catskills with your husband?
Well, as I was told, I think that my husband's family, when they were young, used to stay in a bungalow colony every summer, and his father would come up. But on some level, I guess he wanted to get back to the Catskills and relive some of his youth. So we went to the Nevele in the early 90s. And I don't know whether he expected it to be, the same, but it was quite disappointing to me and to him and to his parents, who, were sort of steeped in that culture, obviously. And it was sad. It was kind of sad to see a cultural institution of sorts just dissolve over time. So, yeah.
Thanks, Lisa. Gail, will you talk a little bit about your experience in the Catskills?
So my family went to the Catskills every Christmas and New Year's. And my parents actually had friends that became lifetime friends that we saw after that week and went back every year. But I remember being a kid, it was the greatest thing for a child to be in the Catskills for that week, because you so totally didn't have to see your parents for like 8 days. And you had counselors if you wanted, and you ran around the hotel and the lobby, and nobody really paid much attention to you. And then every night, you would like try and find your parents at whatever table they were in the nightclub. And, you'd sit there for a few minutes and they'd give you those knockers. I don't know if people remember knockers, but there were these wooden things with balls at the end, and you would bang them on the table. And New Year's, we got to like wear our prettiest dresses, and we always came up with like a special outfit for every New Year's Eve. So it was a great experience as a kid, going to the Catskills with my family every Christmas and New Year's. And I do agree, like it was, yeah, we all have them. We showed ours earlier in the day, but it was really the only place. And other people like went, I heard, like for Passover because it was kosher, or like the food that my parents grew up eating was available there. Like, I mean, we had some of that food, but we didn't have it in abundance. So when you could get herring and borscht and matzo balls and challah and everything you wanted whenever you wanted it, it was a good experience for them. I think even for their own nostalgia from when they were growing up, that they could have these things that their parents gave to them. So that's my Catskills story.
Thanks.
Well,
Mark.
can I add so while we're unmuted?
Yes, please.
And aside from being one of the 3 people who went to law school that have spoken so far, including Rabbi Mendelson, I have been a lawyer for 40 years, and I did have some interesting Yale Jewish experiences too, but we'll save those for another time. My mentor, who was a major lobbyist in New York State, not Jewish, worked in the Catskills as a waiter. And he attributed his ability to know every legislator's preferences, their whatever was necessary to get their interest in an issue. He attributed that to having been a waiter in the Catskills, where you had to learn all the people, and they came back year after year, and from one year to the next, you had to remember how they liked their food, with bananas, not with bananas, and it was all, nothing was written down. You had to keep it all in your head, and you had to know the people and really, what it was that was going to make it a good experience for them, and you get a good tip, or whatever the motivation for that was. But he really attributed that you would walk around the legislature in Albany, and he had that same relationship with every single person, the secretaries, the aides to the legislators, the governor's office. We're not going to go off on that tangent right now, but all of that he really attributed to the experience of several years of working in the Catskills as a waiter.
For sure.
That's a great story. Thanks, Jeff. Mark and Marcia, do you guys want to put your 2 cents in?
You go ahead. Yeah, I mean, I came late to this Catskills, so not many Catskills stories, but in light of Catskills stories, I'm just curious, you spent a lot of time with Bunny Grosinger. Do you have anything to tell us that didn't make it into the book, or, what she had? I'm very interested in what she had to say about the whole experience.
She had very positive things to say. She definitely talked a lot about the way her children felt running around. I would say the most surprising thing was that she didn't know me. I just showed up. We had a very chance meeting at Pilates, which is nuts because we both live on the Upper East Side, and we were both taking Pilates at the same studio. She didn't come one time, and I asked my teacher what happened. I didn't know who she was, and my teacher was like, "Oh, she's at a doctor's appointment, but that's Bunny Grosinger. Have you ever heard of Grosingers?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm writing a book about the Catskills. I've heard of Grosingers." And I was like, "Do you think she would talk to me?" And she's like, "Well, let's ask." And she gave my phone number. I ended up getting connected with Bunny's grandson, who's still a friend. And I went over there. She, other than recognizing me from Pilates, she didn't know me at all. I brought her a bouquet of flowers and copies of my old books. And she just handed me this unpublished manuscript of her cousin, another Grosinger, a Grosinger's memoir. She's like, "Here's my cousin's memoir. It never got published. Here you go." I was like, "Do you have another copy?" She's like, "No, just bring it back to me when you're done." I was like, this is a very trusting woman, but actually Bunny is really trusting and really sweet and loving. And she's probably maybe 97 or 98 now. She's actually not really coherent anymore, but she was really sharp when I talked to her. Everyone loves her. Her phone rang more than my phone. And there were, 50 years between us. And she got so many phone calls, and every person who called her, be it a friend or a family member, she'd be like, "Oh, you've made my day. Thank you so much for calling. You've just brought light and sunshine. Just hearing your voice is all I need." And it was she really personifies that, you catch more bees with honey than with vinegar. There's a reason that this woman who's she's not going out dancing anytime soon, but her phone is ringing off the hook that people want to talk to her, because she makes people feel good about themselves, and she's warm and she's loving. And instead of being "You haven't called me in a month," she's like, "Don't worry, I know you're busy. It's good to hear from you now." And I'm I'm going to be like that when I'm older, I hope, because then people will call me. She's really special and warm. And in some ways, I think she has the hospitality gene in her. These hotels were about making people feel like they were home and they were welcome, and that they were brightening people's day by being there. And that's how she talks to everybody in her life. So, but back to the memoir, I actually, it was so thick and it was on white computer paper. And I was like, I don't know. And the memoir wasn't necessarily going to only be about Grossingers. And I was like, I'm not really going to read this, but I'll take it. So I don't want to be rude and I'll skim it. It was the juiciest, most interesting, unbelievable thing I've ever read. I gave it to my mom. I was like, don't lose it. It's the only copy. I ended up making another copy, not to do anything with it, but because I was so terrified of like coffee spilling on it or that I'd lose it or leave it in a cab. And so I immediately like ran to Kinko's, made another copy just so that I didn't have the anxiety. I read it. I sat down. I couldn't stop. It was like, and then Jenny Grossinger got into a fight with this nephew, and then this fight happened, and then like this person's business failed. So then they came back to the hotel for a job, and it was just like layered, like so unbelievably juicy. And the memoir ended up referencing this Jewish family from Mexico City that these Grossingers became really close with. And I'm reading the memoir and I'm like, I know those people. They all go to Rhoda Shalom School with my children. And I end up calling my friend from Mexico. And I was like, Sandra, I just read all about your parents in an unpublished memoir. She's like, oh yeah, they met on a cruise. She's like, we are like so tight with all the Grossingers. And it was like, we really are just like one like little mishpacha in a way, you know? So, but Bunny is very trusting and very kind. So I would say the memoir was amazing. It was so juicy and interesting. And that's it. She's just like, she is the embodiment of the warmth that was the Catskills.
Marcia.
Yeah, so your next book, are you sticking with that multi-generation theme? And can you tell us anything about it?
Sure. So my next book is called Most Likely. And it is not, it's different. I would say that the humor is the same. Like the humor is the same and the honesty is the same. Like this is how people really feel, you know, and I'm just like out with it. It's about about a group of women who were very good friends in high school, and their 25th high school reunion is approaching. And 3 of the 4 of them return for the reunion, and the 4th is not able to go, and for reasons that will reveal themselves. And they have a moment of reckoning. Like nobody is like where, you know, first of all the insecurities that they had in high school, no matter that like one of them is a top orthopedist now, like she's back in high school and she feels like a nerd, you know, and one of them had a weight problem in high school and she's very thin at the reunion and she feels obese when she's back walking the halls of high school. It's like all those, you know, insecurities come rushing back, but also the people who were primed for success, sometimes it happened, sometimes it didn't. There were some dark horses that like barely, you know, you barely remembered them in high school and now they're lighting the world on fire. And so I'm exploring that in the book. And these women pull out, after the first night of the reunion, they pull out the yearbook and they look at their high school superlatives, which is why the book is called Most Likely. And they read their superlatives and they have a moment of like, uh-oh, like we are not where we thought we would be 25 years out. And they kind of form a pact to make changes in their lives. But naturally, life intercedes and it's not so easy to change course in middle age. And that's the book. The book follows these women over the course of half of a year as they struggle to figure out who they are and what they want. So that's that. That'll be September.
Roberta, I'm sorry, I could not unmute myself. Roberta, I think you have a question.
Okay, a question and a comment. First, and you referenced it, but I told my daughter, who's 38, that I have a book club tonight, a Zoom. And she said, what's the book? And I told her, I said, it's about the Catskills. Do you know what the Catskills are? Do you ever hear of it? She goes, oh, only from The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel and Dirty Dancing, which is both what you referenced. So I thought that was interesting. She has other than that, no clue, which I never realized. And 2 things. One is about your future book, which sounds like it's your 25 years out of high school, and I assume you're in your 40s. Is it personal? I mean, is that why you did that? Because are you about that time or a little later?
Sort of. I mean, I just turned 40. I'm so I'm younger than you said.
A little bit less than you're about what? You're about 22 years out, maybe.
No, it actually comes from, I am actually exactly where I was supposed to be. So like, I really didn't take a circuitous, I mean, other than going to law school, but
Right.
like I was a writer. I was always known as a writer. I was like very type A with my studies, like a very serious student. And then I went to Ivy League school. Like I kind of followed like a very predictable path, but it actually comes from a story my mom told me like a million years ago that like never left me. And she tells it to my kids. I guess it never left me because she repeats it to my children, which is that she went to public school in Brooklyn and she had this like humongous crush on this guy that was like, I guess the hottest guy in the grade. And, you know, he barely knew she existed and she was nerdy and he was gorgeous, this guy named Lewis. And I won't say his last name in case anyone knows him. But anyway, she was really like smitten with him. And I guess she tried to talk to him and she forced her way into talking to him. And she ended up, I forget exactly, but she like gave him her homework. Like she was so in love with him that like she either like cheated on a test for him or gave her homework to copy or like did something or other. And then like he never talked to her again. She then goes to Brooklyn College, gets married, meets my dad, gets married. They buy a house. They are like young and successful and they got married young and they're like among the first of their friends or the first of their friends to be able to afford to buy a house. And they call to have their windows washed. And who should show up to wash the windows but Lewis. And not only was he there to wash the windows, he fell off the ladder and he from the second floor. He's fine. I don't want to be laughing at someone's injury. Like he like fell in the bushes. But needless to say, like my mom tells my kids that story all the time because when they're like upset about something that's happening, my mom's like, this one's popular today is going to be a loser tomorrow. And like, you know, that whole, so that's really where it most likely comes from.
And one last thing. You referenced the suburbs. I got it wrong. It was another book I told our book club that I thought you grew up somewhere else. But you referenced the suburbs. You referenced Roslyn. You grew up in Livingston, New Jersey. I got it. You went to Yale, so I'm sure you know a million kids from Long Island. Did you ever live in the suburbs as an adult? And why did, I was just curious, why did, it's always the suburbs. You didn't do New York City where you're living. And I'm sure those characters could have been, as obnoxious on the upper.
My first two books, the characters live in New York City.
Okay. And how do you know, does your husband why did you choose Roslyn? Did you do Scarsdale also? Didn't you reference Scarsdale in this book? Where's that come from?
Like Scarsdale is a very Jewish suburb that I know very well. And I feel like there's no indictment of Scarsdale. Like it's no different than Livingston, right. But I want to choose Livingston because I grew up there and I don't like, first of all, I probably know Scarsdale better than I know Livingston in a weird way because I didn't go to Livingston High School. I never went to the public school there. I went to private school, the Jewish day school that drew very few kids from Livingston for whatever reason. So I am like my entire life in the city, like when people hear I'm from Livingston and they ask me if I know someone from Livingston, I think it's happened one time that I've known them. Like it's just for whatever reason. So I pick places that I know, like they serve my purpose. Like they have a very large Jewish population. Like Scarsdale has an amazing school system. It's like a place where like very affluent Jews live, So I rather pick real places than like just make up a name. Although Rabbi Mendelson and I were discussing that, but usually I try, like I tell my writing students, you want to be as concrete and specific as possible when you can. But I've written 4 novels and 2 of them have taken place in New York City.
If there aren't any more questions or comments, any good Catskills stories, but I just want to say, this is such a delicious novel. If you haven't read it, there's no way you're not going to read it now. I know for sure your appetite has been whet. I included in the chat a link to the book on Amazon. And because you signed up for this, just so you know, I will be sending out a recording of this talk with another, also with a link to the book on Amazon. Of course, we would prefer that you buy it at your local bookstore. So for those of us in Port Washington, if you haven't picked up the book already, you can always go to the Dolphin and pick it up there. Support your local bookstores as much as possible. And if not, support the giant and get your book. And you know, I think it's such a delicious story. Elyssa, thank you so much for.
I want to give a plug. If you're going to buy it on Amazon, I just want to give a plug to the audiobook. If anybody likes to consume audiobooks, the narrator is a world famous audiobook narrator named Julia Whalen. And it was like a huge get to be able to get her. And because there are a lot of characters in the book, like she really did a sensational job breathing life into their voices. So if you are an audiobook person, it's very good.
Is there any chance that any of your books will be made into a movie?
I have a film agent for both of my, like the last two for Floating Feldmans and Golden Hotel, but so far there haven't been any bites, which is kind of a bummer because I always keep hearing like they'd be great, but I don't know. Maybe one day. Sometimes it happens like a decade later. You just don't know. So
such exciting, rich stories. So I want to thank you, Jackie Kepke. You don't have anything to say, friends? Can you want to unmute yourself?
I actually do have someone who wanted to say hello to you that you might know from Livingston, New Jersey, which is Ellie Slivko Beatis.
Oh yeah.
So I challenge you to, you said that you wouldn't usually know someone from Livingston, but I told her I was.
Or she just went to Solomon Schechter.
She went to Solomon Schechter, I think, from Livingston, but she's lived.
I don't think she's from Livingston. I'm challenging you. Okay, we're gonna.
She lives here in Port Washington, but couldn't make it tonight.
Will you please ask her? Because I'm pretty sure she's not from Livingston.
I will. But I actually listened to the audiobook and read the book. I kind of go back and forth, and I agree. The audiobook was excellent. I've listened to a lot of books with Julia Whalen, and she does a great job.
She's incredible.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So friends, thank you so much to Elyssa Friedland. Again, it's the last summer at the Golden Hotel. Please pick it up if you haven't already. And it's also just such a great gift for friends because it's such a fun read and so much to think about. Don't be surprised, by the way, friends, if you hear me refer to it in one of my high holiday sermons.
Whoa.
Never thought you'd hear that, Elyssa Friedland, did you?
That would be
I'm telling you. It really gave me a lot of food for thought. So thank you so much.
Ben Spratt about that.
What'd you say?
Let's tell Rabbi Ben Spratt about that.
Please do.
That's so funny. Right, thank you so much.
So thank you so much to Elyssa Friedland. And friends, our next program is August 25th, just in time for the high holidays. At the end of the month of Elul, we're meeting with author Susan Shapiro. Her book is called The Forgiveness Tour. And you can read more about it. I'll include a description of the program in my email. And I hope that you'll join us for that. And thanks, everyone. Have a great night. And again, Elyssa, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Bye.
Good night, everybody.